Amanda was a beautiful little girl, my first little girl. I loved her dearly. She was so playful. She got along with her sister and her brother. They rode bikes constantly. She was a daredevil.
I loved soccer, poetry. I was really, really good in school. I had a lot of friends, just really happy. I loved Alaskan summers, running through the woods here barefoot.
In Alaska, never getting dark, you know, you'd have to call them in and say, you have to sleep, you have to sleep.
I had a pretty happy childhood, and then my parents went through a divorce.
Divorce was awful. It was a very violent divorce. And then after the divorce, after I had full custody, he had every other weekend for a visit. Every time she'd come home, she'd be a mess.
Well, I was really depressed from the time I was like 13 on, and so I had issues with cutting, and I feel like that was kind of where my addiction stemmed from, was hurting myself and not knowing how to deal with pain. And then I discovered drinking, and drugs came along with that, and friends that were doing the same thing, and it sort of just tapered into a full-blown addiction by the time I was 18.
Me and my wife got together. I'm a addict in recovery, and she told me a little bit about my daughter. I hadn't met her yet at that point. She called up and was in Vegas and had run away. We got her a ticket, got her up here. We started, you know, just making a place for her, you know, in our lives.
First time I noticed her addiction was when she had her wisdom teeth pulled out. And I had been told, my husband's a recovering addict, had been told that the sign of an addict is they'll get reverse reaction to drugs. And she had her teeth pulled out, and they gave her the pain pills, and she was bouncing off the ceiling like crazy. I mean, I couldn't get her to calm down.
I could see something wasn't quite right from the get-go, but that's just because I've got that addict side of me that says, you know, but that sees stuff.
It wasn't until I had my first daughter at 19 that I realized, you know, even being pregnant, that I couldn't stop. And I wanted to more than anything because I was carrying another life, but I couldn't stop. And that's when I started realizing that I truly had a problem.
I had taken her to recovery several times before. She'd always gotten out. And I always, like I said, I felt the underlying truth wasn't there. And she called me one day and she said, I am done using, and I need help, and I want to get clean.
And she called up, and I answered the phone, and she says, I want to get clean. At that point, I said, you have my full attention.
Through the course of my addiction, I thought about my mom and my kids a lot, because I have 2 older kids now, and I was probably 15 miles away from them at any given time here in Wasilla, but I felt like I was, you know, a whole earth away because I hadn't spoken to them or hadn't reached out. I could have walked to their house at any point, but I didn't know how to do that, how to reach out to them.
I prayed to God that He was going to help, because, like I said, it wasn't just hurting me, it was hurting my wife more, because she wanted her clean.
First time I walked into Valley Oaks, I was a little bit ashamed, and I was scared because I had thought that I had a good handle on what I was doing in recovery at that point, and I was starting over in a new program, and it was just so nice. Everybody there was so friendly. There was familiar faces there that I knew in my addiction that had since been in recovery, and they're working there now, and those people were like, we're so happy to have you here, so happy that you're doing this. And I was really scared, so I thought about leaving, and I called my mom and my stepdad, and I was like, I'm leaving now.
She had been 3 months clean, and then she went to Valley Oaks, and that first day they almost lost her. It was so close. We were praying and praying. We have a friend that works at Valley Oaks, and she was on the phone, and she said, just keep praying, keep praying.
If I were to walk out of there, I would have relapsed, and I would have ended up on the street, And that would have been it. Nobody's fault. I couldn't have turned around and been like, it's my mom and my stepdad's fault. It was my fault. And so that's what drove me to stay.
God's the only thing that could have done anything for her. She, nothing else ever worked for her. She's been rock bottom. She'd lived in the streets. They called us in the middle of the night. We had custody of her kids for 2 years. And she called us in the middle of the night and said, the police called and said, come and get her. We can do nothing for her. And I said, I cannot come and get my daughter. And I cried and cried when I hung up. I said, I cannot help her anymore. God told me I have to step back.
Other programs that I know of people completing, they address your addiction and they stop you from using drugs for the time that you're there. But Valley Oaks addresses the trauma and the hurt and the faith and everything that I think a lot of other places cover up, which is the reason why we go to use anyway.
You got to give it to God. You know, can't do it on your own, and God's the only one that's going to be able to help you, and He's there to help. You just got to ask.
You know, they held me accountable, and without that little piece of it, I don't feel like I would have had the same feeling about the successes I was making. So it was all like small little victories when I would go in there, or when I would complete something or have a good UA. I was all a little victory, and those are needed when you're fresh in recovery.
She said I was kind of jealous because I saw the other girls getting miracles. And I said, honey, your miracle's already been performed. You just have to accept it. I said, your miracle is that you called me that day to get clean, and you have never taken a step backwards from it. I said, that's your miracle from God. And I said, you just have to realize that as a miracle. I said, sometimes we don't see our miracles in life until we're a little bit past them and we look back at them.